Well, it's always a blessing to be with you, and it's a special honor to have the privilege of standing here and opening up God's Word together. And this weekend is a special weekend for me because this team has traveled with me now, some of them for 2 years, and I think this is our last service together, isn't it, before some of you go out into the wide world and make your mark. So I'm so thankful for you and for the blessing that you've been, and I'm glad that we can be together at this place because this church has been a very meaningful place for Beth and me, and your pastor and his wife have been dear, dear friends over the years, and every time we're here, it's a blessing. Thank you, by the way, for hosting the Rooted and Grounded and Steadfast and Secure Conference yesterday. This is our 5th one, as your pastor mentioned, and our largest one. And I think we had over 220 teens and sponsors here yesterday. This whole front area was full, and Matt Herbster from the Wiles preached 2 fabulous messages on the topic of preaching or ministering the word to young people so that their hearts can be challenged to go out and consider ministry themselves. So we had a wonderful day yesterday. It would not have been possible without your church. And we just want to thank you personally and publicly for your investment. I'm going to ask you to take your Bible this morning to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6. And while you're turning there, I came across a story that made an impact on my life that I think is very relevant to what we're talking about this morning. In 1937, a young 7-year-old boy went to the local library in his town in Omaha and checked out a library book, and that book would end up setting the direction of his life. So if you're a librarian in here, then you should pay special attention to this story. This young boy went into the library and he checked out a book entitled 1,000 Ways to Make $1,000. And he was fascinated by that book. From that moment forward, his entire sort of focus was on the idea of investing money and finding ways to grow what little money he had. He had a bike, so he did a paper route. His sophomore year in high school had saved up $25 and he bought a pinball machine. Remember the old pinball machines? And he put that in his local high school, and over a period of time, that produced enough money, and before it was all said and done, he had 3 different pinball machines at 3 local establishments. And he went on to graduate from high school and went on to college and joined an investment firm. And you know this man as William Buffett. That interest that began as a 7-year-old boy propelled him forward to a life of investments that really culminated in him becoming the 3rd most wealthiest man on our planet. As of February last year, Warren Buffett was worth $87 billion of investments. He's only behind 2 people, and you could probably guess who they are. Bill Gates comes in at $90 billion. And then there is the founder of Amazon who comes in at $112 billion. But Warren Buffett has an unusual nickname. He is called the Wizard of Omaha. And the reason for that name is interesting. It's not just because he's been able to accumulate an immense amount of wealth. It is really in how he went about accumulating that wealth. The 2 men that were before him and ahead of him in this ranking are men who made their fortunes either through the founding of a company or the growing and developing of a company, whereas Warren Buffett has made his fortune one investment at a time. He has made a fortune by making good decisions about where to put his money and where and how to use that money. And so from that came the nickname, the Wizard of Omaha. Now, the passage that I've called to your attention is a passage that is intended to give you that kind of advice from a completely different perspective. How do you take your life and how do you invest it one moment at a time so that by the time it is said and done, you stand before the one who gave that life to you, having made an investment that brings rich harvest, rich results for the kingdom of God. Notice how Jesus lays this out beginning in verse 19. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust do corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. That's one piece of advice. Second piece of advice comes in verse 22. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? That's advice, or piece of advice number 2. And then he gives the third piece of advice in verse 24. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Now, from those 3 pieces of advice, from those 3 observations, the Lord is going to draw a conclusion, and you can see the conclusion in verse 25. Therefore, I say unto you. And that little word, therefore, is pointing you back to these 3 realities that the Lord wants you to understand as you come to the idea of good advice for bad times. Now, the Lord is going to give you 4 things in what follows that little word, therefore, but they're all based on these realities. Let me just make sure we catch them in our thinking as we come to this. Notice in verses 19 through 21 that the Lord wants you to see the comparative durability of 2 kinds of treasures. There are 2 kinds of treasures that you can pursue with your life, and the Lord wants you to make sure and think deeply about the value and the durability of these 2 treasures. One of them is more durable than the other. Do you see that in that text? Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on the earth. And then it's describing these treasures in corruptible terms, moth and rust and thieves. But instead lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven. And then that treasure is described in the opposite way as an incorruptible treasure. So the first thing the Lord wants you to see is the comparative durability of 2 kinds of treasures. Then he wants you to see the comparative usefulness of 2 kinds of eyes, or 2 eye conditions. Look at verse 22. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, the whole body shall be full of light. In other words, if your eye is functioning properly, it will put your life in a place where the right kind of illumination is happening. But if thine eye be evil, in other words, if your eye isn't functioning properly, then your whole body shall be full of darkness. So the condition of your heart, the inner illumination of your life is going to be determined by your eyesight. And if your eyes are properly focused, then your life is going to be rightly illuminated. And if your eye is wrongly focused or wrongly functioning, then your life is going to be full of darkness. And then the third piece of advice has to do with the fundamental incompatibility of trying to serve, trying to live your life for 2 opposing masters. And you can see that in verse 24. No man can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. In other words, you have to make a choice. And by the time you get down to verse 25, the Lord is assuming that you have given careful thought to this and that you have chosen in ways that line up with what he is saying. In other words, after hearing the Lord's advice, because you recognize who he is, you have decided, I don't want to live for the kind of treasure that can be lost. I want to live for incorruptible treasure. And I want to have the right kind of eye. I want to have an eye that rightly illuminates my heart with the truth. And I have reached a decision that I am not going to serve any other master than the Lord. So by the time you get down to verse 25, those are the assumptions that the Lord is making. And so the advice that he's about to give you will not make sense if one of those three pieces is off. If you have chosen the wrong kind of treasure, or if you have the wrong kind of an eye illuminating your body, or you are serving the wrong master, then what follows in verse 25 makes absolutely no sense. And by the way, it doesn't make sense unless those things are there. So let's take verse 25 and see what the Lord has to say for us as we live our life in the midst of a very turbulent world, and we want to live in a way that produces the right kind of investment for the Lord. I want you to notice, beginning in verse 25, that the Lord begins with very personal instruction. And he says to his disciples, I say unto you, and then he's going to give the advice. And so notice that the author of all of this is Christ. He is speaking authoritatively as king. When you read the Sermon on the Mount, it's very, very clear that he is speaking authoritatively. And by the way, when you get to the end of the sermon, everybody who heard the sermon would agree with that. They rejoiced because they heard him speak as one having authority and not like the scribes and the Pharisees. And in fact, the Lord is looking at the people that he's preaching to, and he is actually saying, I am speaking to you in the place of Moses. Because throughout the sermon, he'll say things like this: Moses said to you, and then he'll elevate it, but I say unto you. So whatever is following in verse 25 is not just good advice. It's actually authoritative advice, and it is being directed at people who have embraced Jesus as their Messiah. In other words, the advice that is coming here, the instruction that is coming here is targeted to a very unique group of people. A group of people who have come to realize and embrace something about the person and the identity of the one talking to them. And so with that in mind, Jesus says, now here's the advice itself. Do not worry. Take no thought. Do not worry. Do not take thought for your life. And then he's going to specifically break it down, what ye shall eat or what ye shall drink, nor yet for your body what ye shall put on. And then he asks this question: is not the life more than meat or food, and the body more than raiment or clothing? So Jesus is looking at his disciples, and he is speaking to them. And as he is speaking to them, the advice he is giving to them is absolutely disconnected from how everybody else around them is living. Now, I want you to notice that the Lord is not precluding the idea of thought or planning. He is not telling us you should not think about and plan for your life. He is prohibiting a certain kind of thinking. And the thinking that is being prohibited here is anxiety. Do not be torn apart internally. Do not be consumed and overwhelmed with the idea of what am I going to do in order to stay alive? And he lays it out in terms of their life and their body. And again, we noted earlier, this is absolutely bold advice. Nobody else was saying anything like this. And it is difficult advice because these are the things that everybody, including the people who were listening to Jesus, these were the things that everybody needs to stay alive. And so I want you to think about something for a moment as you go back and just let your eye wander down verse 24 and 25. Jesus is actually saying something here. He is saying to you that there is something more important and much greater than the mere preserving and sustaining and enjoyment of your earthly life. And that's why he points you back to those three primary questions. Which kind of treasure are you going to seek? What kind of an eye do you have? And which master have you embraced? Because unless you are seeking the incorruptible treasure of another world that can only be seen with an eye that has been illuminated by truth, and that only happens by the Lord becoming the master of your life, you will not understand the foundational incompatibility of what the Lord is saying to you, because it sounds almost impossible and deeply irresponsible. And the Lord is actually saying to you there is something more important that you ought to be thinking about than just the mere sustaining and enduring and preserving of your own life. Now, in order to help us see this point, he comes to a second thing. Now, he's given us very personal instruction here, and the instruction is, don't worry about your life, don't worry about your body. And then he's going to give you two illustrations, and that's the second thing that you see in the text in verse 26. Behold. And then notice the word behold there. It's the word look, but it's not just the idea of a glance. It's the idea of, I want you to think about something. It's Jesus pointing you in two directions, and he is saying, now I want you to take a long, hard look, and I want you to think deeply about what I'm about to show you. And the first thing that he says to them is this: when I am your master and you are living for the right kind of treasure because your eye has learned to see properly, then you need to know that life and food are the responsibility of the Father to provide. Look at the birds of the air. Take a long look at the birds of the air. When I was coming into the parking lot this morning, I had an opportunity. I knew I was preaching this, and I thought this is really sort of unique here, because all of these geese were flying around. I mean, you know what I'm talking about? They were just flying in. And I just watched them. They were circling and honking. And you ever tried to watch a goose land? It's a very interesting thing to watch these birds land. And sometimes they don't get it right, and they kind of come in for a hard landing. I am not a big goose fan. They do all kinds of things that are not pleasant. And when I pastored in Milwaukee, these geese were everywhere. And I used to daydream about getting in my car and trying to run over one of these geese. And you know, it's not what you're supposed to do, so I probably shouldn't say that for any geese lovers here. I am thankful for geese. One day I was talking to a gentleman in our church, and I said, how did you come to this church? He said, well, I got up one morning and my life was a mess, and I felt really compelled to go to church. And so I got in my car and I started on the road, and I know about this church, and I was going to go to this church. And I came down to the road where it kind of narrows, and there were geese all across this road, and they weren't about to move. So I just stopped my car, and these geese just looked at me. And while I was waiting for the geese to move, I looked over, and there was the church. And so I just thought, why don't I go there? And he pulled into the driveway. So I am thankful for geese a little bit. But the Lord is saying, look at the birds of the air. Have you ever seen a bird work? I mean, have you ever seen a bird stressed out? The Lord has created a context by his good pleasure in which all the provision that is necessary to keep the birds of the air alive is available to them. That doesn't mean they don't have to go and find it. That doesn't mean that there aren't times where it is difficult for them. It just means that the Father who is overseeing all of creation has designed a way in the system of his creation that considers the birds of the air. Then he points you to the second illustration, and that is the flowers of the field. Notice how he points in that direction. Notice verse 27. Which of you, by taking thought, can add 1 cubit unto a statue? In other words, what will worry do to change one thing about your physical condition? And why take ye thought for raiment? Why are you worried and anxious about your clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. And yet I say unto you that even Solomon in all of his glory was not arrayed like one of these. And then he draws this incredible conclusion. Wherefore, if God so clothe the grass of the field, which today is and tomorrow is cast into the oven, shall he not much more clothe you? And so there are these two illustrations, the birds of the air and the flowers of the field. And those illustrations teach us that life and food are abundantly provided by the Father, and that provision and protected are abundantly provided by the Father. And so I want to stop here for a minute. I want to ask this question. So if that is true, why is it that I have so much trouble with anxiety? Why am I struggling the way I struggle? And I don't think I'm the only one, all right? I'm using myself as an illustration here. Why do I struggle to the degree that I struggle with what the Lord is saying here? Because I think if I'm really honest, as I think about what the Lord is saying and as I preach it and teach it to others, this truth that sounds so good in our Bibles and that makes perfect sense on a Sunday morning when we're sitting here is absolutely incompatible with what actually happens in our lives on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So why is it that I struggle with what the Lord is saying? And I wonder if it doesn't have something to do with my eye. If you go back up to the 3 pieces of advice that the Lord gave at the first, right in the middle is in my opinion, the most strategic thing the Lord said, and it has to do with your eye. How in the world am I going to look at life like this? How in the world is advice like the words that are coming out of the Lord's mouth going to make any kind of sense? And the Lord says you have to have the right kind of eye. Your entire life will be illuminated properly if your eye is healthy. If you have a healthy spiritual eye, then everything that follows is going to make absolute sense to you. And the reason I say that is because the third thing that you see down in the text that we're looking at is that there is a problem that the Lord reveals. He gives us this instruction and these illustrations, but he comes right down to a major problem that we all have, and it's at the end of verse 30. He looks at those men and he says to them, now the reason that you are struggling with this is because of a problem with your eye. And he describes it like this: O ye of what? O ye of little faith. Now stop and think about this. These men had come to recognize who Jesus was. They had left their nets and their belongings, and they were following Jesus. These were the men that belonged to him. These were the men that the Father had given to him. These were the men that were going to say things like, we know who you are. We know that you are the Messiah. We know that you are the Son of the living God. These are the very men who are going to look at Jesus and they're going to say to him, who else are we going to follow? Who else are we going to come to? You have the words of life. But throughout their entire journey with the Lord said to them, now you have a struggle. And here's your struggle. Your faith is weak. And what I think the Lord means here is this. I think the Lord means that as he looks at their lives, their trust in him is weak. Lord, are you really going to provide for me? I can see the birds and I can see the flowers and I can make the connection logically in the argument. I know that you are taking something less valuable and showing me how God handles something less valuable, and then you're coming over to something more valuable and you're asking me to draw a conclusion. If God takes care of something less valuable, then do you think he's not going to take care of something more valuable? Of course he's going to take care of something more valuable, and you are way more valuable than a flower. You are way more eternal than a flower. You are way more valuable than a bird of the air. And so we see the argument, we follow the logic, so why is it that our heart continues to be troubled? Because to be truthful, this isn't the first time probably that most of you have heard a sermon like this, or a sermon even on this passage. And this certainly isn't the first time that I've taught on this passage. So why is it that even after all of this instruction, we have a heart that struggles and that is internally torn apart? And I think the answer comes in the final section of this paragraph where Jesus reveals a priority that must be established. And that priority begins in verse 31. Therefore, take no thought. You see that word thought? It occurs 6 times in this paragraph. And it's the idea here of anxiety. Don't be worried. Take no thought, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or wherewith shall we be clothed? For after all of these things do the Gentiles seek. And the idea there is that there is sort of their life pursuit. There is the investment of all of their focus, of all of their energy. Their eye has been set in such a way that when they look at all of their life, this is what it comes down to. The pursuit, the intentional, intense pursuit of something. And what Gentiles are pursuing is this earthly life. What they're going to wear, what they're going to eat, where they're going to live, how they're going to live, and all of the things that go with that. That is the dominating pursuit of their life. That is what they do with all of their might and with all of their strength and with all of their life. They take all of that and they invest it in the pursuit of wealth that will make their life better. And Jesus is saying, now that cannot be what you seek for. Your eye has to be different. You have to be seeking something different. You have to be seeking, verse 33, you seek first as the priority, as the chief end, as the major point of your life, you seek first a different kingdom. You take everything that a Gentile, a non-follower of God is doing, and they are doing it in the pursuit of something. They are doing it in the pursuit of a kingdom. They are doing it in the pursuit of their own kingdom. And they want wealth in that kingdom that they are going to store up. They want houses and lands in their kingdom. They want pleasure and entertainment in their kingdom. They want safety and security in their kingdom. And they are going to be investing their entire energy and their entire focus on anything that will bring that kingdom more wealth and more safety and more provision and more security. And Jesus said, you are to live in an entirely different way because you are living for an entirely different objective. You are working as hard as they are, and you are investing your life just like they are, but you're doing it for a different kingdom. You are doing it for the establishment of his kingdom and his righteousness. All of your energy, all of your resources, your entire life, you are putting in the hands of someone to invest. And he is wiser than the Wizard of Omaha. Because unlike the Wizard of Omaha, he is actually omniscient. He knows everything. He knows about the birds. He knows about the flowers, and he cares about them. He is deeply interested in the birds. He is deeply interested in the flowers. And the same one who has that kind of knowledge and that kind of interest in the creation from his hand is deeply concerned, deeply vested, deeply interested in you. And he is taking your life and he is investing it one moment at a time, one stage of the journey at a time, in ways that are going to establish his kingdom and advance his righteousness. And when you have decided what kind of treasure you're going to seek and which master you're going to follow because your eye has been healthy, then everything the Lord is saying here makes sense. So what am I supposed to do about food? What am I supposed to do about clothing? What am I supposed to do about transportation? What am I supposed to do to provide for my family? And the answer is a promise that God makes to you. All of these things, all of them, God will add to you. God will multiply to you. So let me close with this illustration that I think will make the point. Let's say that tomorrow you go to work and there is a little note in your inbox to come and see your boss. And so you make an appointment and you go in and you see your boss. And your boss says, listen, here's what we're going to be doing. We have had really an unusually good year for the company, and we're going to give a bonus this year. And everybody in the company is going to get a bonus. And I want you to go down to HR, and I want you to announce that bonus to everybody. And so you find out that your company is going to give you a $10,000 bonus. Now, what would actually happen tomorrow morning if that happened? I mean, it's not totally inconceivable, but that's how you know this is an illustration, right? It's hypothetical. So you go in tomorrow, and by the end of the day, you have announced to the entire company what is going to happen. And man, by 5 o'clock that day, everybody has already started talking about what they're going to do with their bonus. So you sit down at the end of the day with about maybe 8 or 10 employees, and you kind of wrapping up the day, and you kind of get the meeting done, and you guys start talking, and the conversation quickly goes to what's going to happen with this bonus. And so here's one of your workmates, and he says something like this: man, this could not have come at a better time. My daughter or my son is getting married, and they're going to have this huge wedding, and so the wife and I are going to take this bonus, and it's going to really be able to help us give them the wedding of their life. And somebody else says, well, you know, I'm really excited about this bonus because I've had my eye on a boat, and you know, I've been kind of looking at this boat and kind of deciding, should I or should I not buy this boat? And I'm getting the boat, man. This is going to take all the objections the missus has away, and I'm getting the boat. Or, you know, I'm going to take my wife on a vacation. We're going to go to Hawaii. We're just going to go out and we're just going to enjoy what God's given us. And then they kind of look at you and you say, well, you know, our church is in the middle of a building program. Or there's a missionary over in China, and I'm going to take this $10,000 and I'm going to give it to my church. What do you think everybody else around you is thinking? Are you kidding me? I mean, I know you're really churchy, but don't you already give a lot of your money to the church? I mean, aren't you one of those people that gives money anyway to the church? I mean, how much more money are you going to give? I mean, they weren't counting on it. You didn't even know about it till this morning. What in the world are you doing taking $10,000? You know when the last time this company gave a bonus? No, they're not saying that to you, but that's what they're thinking. And you know what the difference is? Your eye. You have an eye that puts an entirely different kind of light in your body, in your inner man. And because what really matters to you is the gospel, what really matters to you is the advancement of God's work and God's kingdom and God's righteousness, it is a joy, it is an excitement, it is the first thing that came to your mind when you found out you had $10,000 coming to you that you had no idea about. Now, folks, that's the best way I know how to illustrate the difference between someone who is seeking first the kingdom of God and someone who isn't. Father, as we take our time this morning to reflect on what you have taught us from your word, I pray that you would be at work in our heart. Lord, there is your kingdom and its righteousness, and we have been enlightened by your Spirit to that kingdom. As we close this morning, I wonder how many of you would say, I have embraced the truth about Jesus, but I don't know that I've really made myself available in this way. I mean, I participate. I'm good with being a part of this kingdom, but I do not know that it has been the primary focus of my life. I don't know that I have really put the advancement of that kingdom at the forefront, even above my own life and its pursuits. And that last illustration really helped me to see that. And so this morning, by the grace of God, I want to ask God to help me adjust my eye, because I want to see like that. I want to be illuminated by the Spirit of God so that I see life like this. And I'm going to ask God to begin that process in me this morning. Would you slip your hand up? I would love to pray for you this morning. You say, this is the way I need to start looking. Thank you. Anybody else? You say, this is me, all right? All right, this is me. This is what God is teaching me. I need to be illumined this way. Maybe you're here this morning and you would say, I have been living this way, but there are a lot of things that have come in the way recently, and I've just sort of lost my zeal. I've lost my heart for this. I've been fatigued in this, and I've been reminded this morning of its paramount importance. And so I want to re-engage. I want the Lord to refresh me and to re-engage me at this level. And I want you to pray with me as you pray with these others. Would you slip your hand up, join these others? You say, you know what, I'm just fatigued and I'm tired and I just sort of lost my way in this. And I want to re-engage. I want to reconnect in this great mission that God is doing. And maybe you're here this morning and you would say, Brother Sam, I'm not even sure I'm a part of that mission. I mean, you talked in ways today that made absolutely no sense to me. I mean, I'm sitting in a room full of people that I can't even begin to understand how they think this way and live this way. It is completely foreign to me. I mean, I know about Jesus and I know about the cross, and I know about the whole Easter message, but this way of thinking is entirely foreign to me. And I'm beginning to realize that part of the problem is I'm not sure I really belong to Jesus. And I'm examining that this morning, and I want you to pray for me. That's where I'm at. I don't think I have light in me, I think I have darkness in me. And I want